change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
All right, everyone. We are so excited to be back here for episode 25 of the Fundraising AI podcast. And today is another special day. Scott and I love when we can kind of get away from the general weekly updates on who's getting hired and fired in the big tech firms or, which new tools are doing it. And we do love those things too. Don't get me wrong. Like we're
fun.
Nonprofit nerds at heart, but we absolutely love when we can, bring on a special person to spend some time with and just gain perspectives and insights on AI and life in general within the nonprofit context. And today we have a really, really special guest, someone that I've met, I guess, a couple of years ago, Shannon McCracken, who is the head of the Nonprofit Alliance. And I actually, Shannon, I met you through Brian Crimmins, the co-author of Generosity Crisis. Right. Yeah. And so Brian and I think probably back when he was consulting for me, I was at City of Hope and he got to know you and he's like, hey, there's these two different universes here. And I think they're talking about some of the similar things. And it was so great to meet you a couple of years ago. So it's been a delight over the last couple of years just to get to know you better, get to know the work of TNPA more. And, to fast forward to today to have you on Fundraising AI podcast to talk about you and your journey alongside of that, what you're seeing, today and in the future as it relates to, the nonprofit sector and TNPA and never a dull moment as I know that you're deeply involved in these things. So it's so great to have you here today.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that lead in. I'm delighted to be here and congratulations to both of you on 25 episodes. That feels big and legitimate.
Perseverance, I think, if anything, maybe.
And I think we have at least 5 confirmed listeners, so it's good. Keep them for another 25.
Perfect. Yeah. You'll be up to 20 in no time.
Right. It's been absolutely amazing, actually. When we started this, we had probably very low expectations for anyone listening. And it's been so rewarding to, see the numbers go up in the charts, and not just in the US, but internationally as well, which was, I think, maybe something I didn't anticipate. But, obviously, this is a hot topic. I think a lot of people are, the delta between those that are using AI versus those that believe it can be helpful is pretty big. Salesforce had a recent report that showed 12% of nonprofits are using it. 60% believe that it could be helpful, but needed to know more about it. And I think we fit nicely kind of squarely in that kind of that gap. And so it's been really great for us to hear. In fact, from the people that have listened to every episode, shout out to all of you. And we have a number of them, which is like surprising. Share a little bit about yourself. You have a really extensive career going back from like Charity Navigator, Special Olympics, International, and now in your work in Nonprofit Alliance. I'd just love you to kind of just share with the audience a little bit about that journey, because it's pretty, impressive organizations that you've worked with, and then round us out like where you're at today and what Nonprofit Alliance does.
Absolutely. Yes. So I started it wasn't my first job, but I spent 17 years at Special Olympics. So this amazing opportunity to be part of a powerhouse brand and part of a team that was charged with building an integrated fundraising program, not only for headquarters where I was, but Special Olympics is a federated organization. So we were doing this in partnership and on behalf of more than 50 state programs, state chapters. So we're all separate 501c3s accredited under the Special Olympics umbrella. And so it was this, first of all, I got all my fundraising chops, building this integrated program. When I first got to the organization, that's at the point that they had just launched a website and said, well, we can never take donations online, right? So, and then fast forward 17 years. So it was an amazing time to be there and to be building fundraising and what became possible and all the integrated channels. And then this partnership with the responsibility to these state programs. And that really taught me how to work with partners, because all of those programs, they may be Special Olympics, in brand, but they're all delivering mission in their unique way that meets the needs of their communities and their state and all of the diversity that exists across the country. They have their own boards, their own budgets, their own staff priorities, their own other funding channels. And we had to come up with something that worked for everyone. And so it taught me diplomacy. It taught me how to bring naysayers into the room to be able to hear those voices. It taught me how to build partnerships and alliances and choose the battles. Battles is probably the wrong word, not battles, but like choose the things that were important to really fight for and be transparent in what was working and what wasn't and own that and figure out solutions. So, that it's hard to write a job description for that or what you get to learn from that, but that was amazing. And then this jump to Charity Navigator, and I got to be there at a really pivotal moment when they were rethinking, redesigning what their methodology should look like to move beyond financial and accountability and transparency and really try to get our arms collectively as a sector around impact and proxies for impact. And my role was Chief Development Officer. So I was responsible for finding the resources to make that happen. And I got to bring in the passion for connecting Charity Navigator with the nonprofits that it was reading, which at that point wasn't really happening. It wasn't part of the DNA there. They were very focused on serving the donors as the customer, if you will, and not so much that connection with nonprofits. And so getting to be part of that shift of nonprofit interest in this third-party evaluator was I think my contribution to the major shift that Charity Navigators made.
And still at another pivotal time now, you're still on the board, right, with Charity Navigator?
Yes, still on the board. So I left as staff and then was able to continue to serve in a different now way. So it's been exciting to continue to see what they've done, those building blocks. Yeah,
that's pretty remarkable as they go through another transformation. And then round us out then on Nonprofit Alliance. For those that aren't familiar with Nonprofit Alliance, a little bit about, maybe why you were drawn there, and then, kind of what Nonprofit Alliance stands for.
Sure. So the Nonprofit Alliance is a trade association for nonprofits and firms and consultants that work alongside nonprofits towards their missions. And we formed in 2018. I was employee number 1 walking in the door. And I think there's what I'd learned from those roles around building partnerships, certainly around fundraising and nonprofit world, around the kind of bringing diverse perspectives and sometimes very disagreeing perspectives together into a room and coming up with something new and different. Those skill sets have served me well. In Charity Navigator, because it was a much smaller organization than Special Olympics, I had exposure to things like board development and HR type roles and compliance and these pieces I didn't get to see inside a large organization. So I brought some of that with me and really just this passion for building something new. So that's what the Nonprofit Alliance has been.
That's excellent.
That's awesome. And I love in your background, you've gone through transformational changes before, right? Some tech driven, like moving to online donations, some cultural driven, like Charity Navigator going donor focused to nonprofit focused. Where do you see AI in these as a comparison to what you've gone through before? The same, different? How are the conversations going?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think AI changes the DNA of who we are and what we do as a sector. And I love the way, Nathan, you and I have had conversations about this. I love the way Fundraising AI talks about beneficial AI, distinct and separate from ethical and responsible. And this idea of AI being able to benefit society and deliver tangible outcomes. And that's the definition of nonprofit work. And the idea that we have these tools and capability and additional capacity to scale solutions, as long as we do it responsibly and methodically, but it gets to change the way we do our work. It doesn't change the work, it doesn't change the purpose, but it gives us a new way to do it differently and hopefully better.
Yeah, I think that's so important. When we hear the word even artificial intelligence, it kind of sounds fabricated and something unattached. And when we think about it from an augmented perspective and in different roles that we've had, I think about the roles that I've had throughout my career, like how could they have been augmented or how could they have been enhanced by, this work? And then to your point, not being satisfied with just ethical AI, but being really adamant that it has to, have a long-term benefit to humanity at large. I was not planning on going on this tangent right now, but we are faced with, and while this podcast this week is not an update on what's going on, we're confronted with technology today that allows us to remove fundraisers from fundraising. So essentially removing humans from this idea and then just offloading it to robots, and which I thought, we'd be a couple of years away from, and we're not. Like we're here where we're having to make those tough decisions. I know Nonprofit Alliance you're deeply entrenched on the political landscape. And, while we live in this very unregulated country from an AI perspective, that, we're seeing more of those things come. I'm just curious, and I totally deviated from another question I will ask you. I'm so fascinated by, where you guys are really deep in that intersection of like, how will policy, shape, how nonprofits use AI. Just curious, like any of your thoughts on that. Should nonprofits be the same as everyone else? And then maybe my other tangent question, which is, your views on like how we keep humans at the center of this business.
Right. That's the harder question. So we'll save that one first.
Okay.
The first one around policy, so data privacy policy and regulation is one of our pillar issues that we've been working on for several years. And while states have moved somewhat quickly on it, there are 14 comprehensive laws out there, that Congress has been much slower. They've proposed things that just haven't taken off. And our position on that is that we want one national standard, right? So I think AI will be a driver for that, because we are seeing the appetite in Congress to move on this, to get out ahead of it as much as they can at this point. And you can't have AI regulation without having data privacy regulation, so it's going to push or pull data privacy.
At the federal, so you're saying at the federal level having AI policy, right?
And we're starting to see some of those, some of that language being drafted, some of it being circulated. There was just earlier this month, there was a new AI roadmap that a bipartisan group of senators put out. And that was really the culmination, or the culmination is probably not the best word there, but it's where they are after putting together multiple insight forums over the past number of months from these curated groups of people they see as having AI interests and AI expertise, so technologists and others. It is a good document. It's practical. It's, it's not perfect, but it has some good bones to it. Mm-hmm. The problem is nonprofits were not adequately represented in these forums that they put together, right? So nonprofits, like everyone else, do need to be covered with compliance requirements and standards, and absolutely, but not in the same way as profit-driven. Right. There are going to be some policy requirements that are burdensome in a way that makes sense if you're making profit from the tools that you're developing and deploying, but not so much if you're using them for the societal benefit. And so that's where we need to really uncouple nonprofits from other business entities, even from small businesses, to really recognize the distinct purpose and use of AI that is unique and needs to be protected.
Yeah, absolutely.
I taking a step back, just thinking about where you are in your position and all the different areas you're working with, I commend you for the work. I mean, you're in the middle of nonprofit as a sector, which is not the fastest moving sector, AI, which is a very fast moving sector, and then throwing in federal government policy. Yeah, like that you're between a very fast moving rocket ship and a hard place that doesn't like to move at all. We saw a glimpse of that when we were in Geneva with the UN and the ISO talking about how to drive these policy changes. But like, how do you get the impact? How do you drive that impact of this is not something we can just sit and wait to come up with? We need to really get ahead of this now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what legislators, and we'll talk specifically at the federal level, like Congress realizes that they were sat back on their heels a little bit with social media to wait and see what would happen. And now you can't put that, back in the can. So, and they're scrambling to catch up. They're not going to do that again with AI. So is it going to be the fastest process ever? No, it's not going to keep pace with the rate at which the technology is advancing and people are adopting and adapting it. But there's motivation here, and I think that's going to help even bring together pretty divided political stances.
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo Scott's sentiment too. I mean, I think I look at it as a participant in the philanthropic ecosystem, and I look at Nonprofit Alliance and your leadership as this ray of hope, because I mean, honestly, without it, I don't know where we would be, like our sector, where would be represented in areas around privacy, or especially in AI. I mean, I've read the legislation, and to your point, like a nonprofit like Feeding America would be evaluated the same as AWS or Microsoft, which is just, very different incentives, and it can be debilitating. Now, all this to say is like fundraising AI and personally, like really big on the need for governance, right? And the need for, to ensure that bad actors aren't manipulating people and taking advantage of people. We want to maintain the purity of trust within the nonprofit sector, but it can't be so burdensome that it creates such a digital divide between for-profits and nonprofits. And nonprofits are like, look, it's too expensive to use AI, so I'm just not going to. Bad things would happen in that case. So, all right, we're gonna circle back on how do we keep human centric, and we'll do that at the end.
Let me type that into my prompt over here so I can come up with a good answer for you.
Exactly. Yeah, you got plenty of time. So talking about you. So you've been named Nonprofit Times Power and Influence in the top 50 for the last 2 consecutive years. You've worked with, you work with a lot of amazing professionals. You've hired professionals. I'm curious about how you're looking at the philanthropic landscape of, like, for people hiring throughout the sector, like how AI is changing either the need for professional development or upskilling or AI fluency. Is it a big deal or a little deal, or kind of how are you evaluating it within your own ecosystem versus like how you see it kind of nationally? Is this something that we need to pay attention to?
Yeah, I'll talk about how I'm looking at it for my own staff right now, which I think then I would project that onto other organizations and other team leads as well. I'm looking at it right now and I'm evaluating tools, and we're probably going to move on something within the next week or two, because first of all, efficiency is for the organization, right?
Sure.
So if there are really great tools there, then we need to be using those. And we're a small staff, we're fewer than 10 people. And so everybody finding an extra half hour a day, that starts to scale pretty quickly to practically a second year or another human being on staff, right? I would love another human being on staff. So we need to do that for those reasons. I also feel this incredible responsibility to my team, because I have fantastic staff and I hope they stay forever and ever with TNPA, but they probably won't. What are the odds that everybody's going to retire from TNPA who's there now? I feel this incredible responsibility to make sure that they have the skills they need to be competitive in the marketplace when they do decide to move on. So because they're going to be going out and competing against people who have similar job description backgrounds, similar roles, similar titles. And if those people have AI fluency and know how to use the tools and have a comfort level with it, and my staff members do not, they're not going to compete. I mean, there's just and what a disservice. And what to them as smart individuals with huge potential.
Yeah.
So.
What a great way to think about that from a leadership, perspective, is that you're looking at that as your responsibility as a leader to equip, your team with tools to be successful. And, unfortunately, and Scott and I, we work with a lot of nonprofits. I mean, we have too many that actually have either outright like kind of outlawed AI tools. So what's happening is either putting people at a disadvantage, or two, people are using it, on the side, under their desk, to, kind of like under the radar. And so we're seeing both of those things and it sounds like you're on a journey to essentially evaluate tools that will, align with the values of TNPA. And, you're obviously very big into, privacy and security. So I'm sure that's, one of those boxes that you're checking, but to do it in a way that, you're bringing the team alongside you. And honestly, when you were talking about giving time back, I was with the head of AI for Royal Bank of Canada recently, Bobby, if you're listening, and I was so unbelievably impressed with their metric of whether AI is successful at RBC is if they can gain back 50% of a person's time. And that's a really high bar, because we see AI somewhere between 20% and 60%, depending on the job. Like 20% is transformative. Like, for me, like, oh my gosh, if I got an extra day a week to like do human things, like, I mean, human work things, but like, gosh, like, so I love that you brought that up, and it's just like, that's an FTE. That's a dividend of time that you can apply to other things that you just couldn't get to otherwise, or you couldn't afford to without that other FTE.
Right.
And I
Imagine splitting the difference. So part of it goes back to the organization, more
Yeah.
time for developing, things you never get time to do or do well. And the other time goes back to people's time that, so when you talk about things like a 4-day work week,
yeah.
if you're saving 20% of time, that starts to become a more viable discussion for organizations that can't slow down, but also are looking at that as a way to take care of staff. So,
Absolutely.
sorry, Scott, I cut you off, I think.
No, that's wonderful. And I just continues. I was going back and thinking, most organizations assess AI from a risk and reward perspective of that organization, right? You're doing it for the organization, TNPA, but also the individuals who are working for the organization now. So you're really taking like a bottom down and top up approach. And I just anticipate that there's going to be a lot of value in how you're going about that. But back to the data privacy and cybersecurity, like you're very vocal in that area. Where do you see AI enhancing, playing a role? Again, risk reward. Where can it be used, and where should we be concerned about its use?
That's a great question. I think it rides alongside. I'm gonna kind of meld a couple of thoughts here, Scott, and then you can keep me accountable for actually answering the question, unlike Nathan's question that I dodged. I think it rides alongside the whole DEI conversation and ethics around that. And I would love to hear if you all see this the same or differently. What I really have seen in AI doing is driving open conversations about the realization that AI can have biases in them because of the way that humans have informed them and have done the training, so like, and we know that because these horror stories pop up that are like really tangible that we can retell almost like campfire stories, so like the system that was misgendering women of color, and humans looking at the outputs recognize that these individuals were being misgendered, and then they could go back and look and see that the images were not fully inclusive that were used to train, and then they could fix that. The fact is, those biases exist in all of our interactions and all of the decisions that we're making, and we're not we've gotten a little bit better at this in the past couple of years, but generally we are still not great at recognizing or calling those out. It's much harder to say, geez, I think those decisions Nathan's making are probably, but we can talk about that when it's a tool or a system or a platform, and then like fix it. And so I actually see AI in that place being a way that we can improve some of those DEI outcomes or discussions or awareness. And I think some of that, so that's sort of one jump, but then Scott, coming back to your question, I think some of that is the same around data privacy, that we're really thinking like, gosh, we're putting this into this black box, and like it can be used and accessed in different ways, the ways that we maybe haven't imagined yet. So what are the appropriate guardrails that we need to put up? What is some of the compliance? What are some of the disclosures and the agreements and the opt-ins versus opt-outs? We can really be more thoughtful because it's this whole new planet of systems and tools that we don't fully understand. Most of us, don't fully understand or don't know what that next iteration will be. And in some ways I think it's helping to drive that. And as we talked about earlier, add some more urgency to it. So we can't just keep saying, oh, well, we'll keep puttering along until we get this right. No, we've got to start putting stakes in the ground. And if we have to adjust, then we adjust. But let's do it now, because AI is not going to stop moving forward to wait for us.
Kind of taking one step back from a nonprofit perspective. So Nonprofit Alliance, I think, looks at the whole nonprofit, not just on, I know you have a focus in, you have a obviously a big following in the direct response side of the business, multi-channel and all of that, but kind of representing the whole nonprofit, if you will. Are there areas that you think AI is just, can really be transformative for nonprofits that in general, just not any right or wrong answers, but just thinking about, is it fundraising, or is it mission delivery, or is it operations, or kind of all of those things?
I think it can be all of those things. I think AI is going to do, we can categorize it as maybe 3 things, right? So it's going to allow us to scale solutions faster. So that's some of the program delivery side, but it's also all the operations that are the backbone behind that. So scale solutions faster and find those right solutions. I think it's going to help us, it's already helping us do a better job of connecting with donors, connecting with the right people at the right time, and also knowing who's not interested in connecting with us on this mission. So I think it's going to make us, this maybe is bringing me back to your discussion of humans and fundraising, Nathan. But so that's number 2. And then number 3, I think it will level set access to knowledge and resources. So where we're finding those efficiencies where a small organization doesn't have the ability to move as fast or learn as fast or have access to the same information that a more well-resourced organization does, I think AI tools will help level that playing field a little bit. And level the playing field suggests that there's competition, but also it's just about making that smaller nonprofit operate a bit more like a large nonprofit and be more impactful and effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just, I mean, Scott's heard this before, but I once in a while I can think back and dream of my first nonprofit job, which was, I was the accidental fundraiser at the local Boys and Girls Club. And, I was the grant writer and the games person and the whatever in between with a bunch of college interns working, for me. It's like hard to even express how transformative this technology would have been for me in that small number, in a vast majority. I mean, what are we, like 1.7 million nonprofits in the US alone, somewhere between 1.5, 1.7. And a vast majority, I don't know what percentage, but vast majority are very small, right? Just super lean and mean. This technology is just amazing. What an amazing opportunity for them to really, level up, I guess, and to support really important missions at scale.
Yeah. And there is a heck of a lot of work that people working for nonprofits in any role do, around writing first drafts of copy of whatever, website, letters to donors, your annual report, whatever it is, like writing those first drafts, synthesizing information from multiple sources, summarizing and recapping meeting notes, all those things that AI right now can help us do better. And so then again, it's what are those other things that either AI isn't ready to do or we don't want AI to do for us, but the human connection piece there's more human time to do those. That's
absolutely
like, we 20 years ago, we were like talking about how can we clone ourselves. This is sort of like that, right? We're creating greater efficiencies and being able to free up more of ourselves to do the things that we really need to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've been in the nonprofit sector for a while. When you look ahead to the next 5 or 10 years, what do you think is going to be the most impactful in terms of AI? Like, where do you think it's going to be the biggest game changer for these organizations to get to a different level?
I think it's probably those 3 areas. I don't know how to choose one of those, but scaling our programs, connecting with donors, level setting access. And then I think one of you said, Nathan, I think you said something about trust earlier. And it's that trust piece, because that's where we hear some of the fear, right? Or the reluctance is around, you have to maintain trust, and nonprofits operate at the speed of trust and currency of trust. Like that is our cornerstone. I've been thinking about this word trust the past couple of days. So that's why it stood out when you said it. And people, when we talk about trust in nonprofits, it's trust to do the work that we say that we're doing.
Yeah.
So if we're a Boys and Girls Club and we're providing that safe, I don't know exactly the mission, but providing that safe space for social development and you can fill in the blank there, Nathan. I'm not doing them justice, but you darn well better have been delivering on that. And the people and the families and the donors and staff and the interns, they trusted that that's what you were doing every day when you got up and went to work. And if we can do all of that more effectively for those reasons that we just named, we can do that more effectively because of some of the benefits of AI, then that should really increase the trust. Now, there are ways that can go terribly wrong, but we're aware of those ways and we can put those guardrails and accountabilities in place. And so Independent Sector just came out with their new annual survey of trust measurement, and nonprofit trust last year was at 52%, and this year is 57%, 5 percentage point gain, which is significant. And, and nonprofits are still above government and corporate and, all the other sectors that were measured. That trust piece is so core to who we are. And if we just can continue to do that better, like that's the potential that's sitting right here if we don't let ourselves be scared away from it.
I think that's so important. And that does bring us back to the center, keeping humans at center, right? Trust is something that is inherently human, that a bot can act in a trustworthy way, but it never can be trustworthy, right? It can express the ideas of love, but it can never sit across from someone and cry with you. And so I think those things that are inherently human, trust being at the cornerstone of what nonprofits, how they operate, that also means that we have a higher role and responsibility to ensure that the technology we use preserves and protects trust. And that's what I love about Nonprofit Alliance, and that your willingness to fight the hard fight, on the Hill, like, again, it just provides me this comfort of knowing that somebody's advocating for our sector. So I'd love to end just with two quick questions. One is I'd love for you to just share how people get in touch with you in Nonprofit Alliance, and if there are things that an average person should know about, how to get involved from a legislative perspective or otherwise. And two, I'm so curious based on everything you've shared, because you seem to have a very good balance between like the promise and peril, the promise, and maybe peril is not the right word, but promise and whatever the right word, responsibility. So my second question after you share is just to end on, do you consider, with all of this to say, is this a time to be optimistic about technology in the nonprofit sector, or is it a time to evaluate, or is it another time?
Okay, so how to get in touch. Our website is tnpa.org. And so you can sign up for our email newsletter. We have tons and tons of content about policy issues and resources and membership information if you're interested in joining, upcoming program, calendar of events. So check us all out there. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. Maybe Scott and Nathan can drop my LinkedIn in the show notes or something, but I'd love to directly connect with folks there. So that's how to get in touch. How to be involved in advocacy. We do a couple Hill days a year where we take members and volunteers up to Capitol Hill to meet with the congressional members and their staffers. And we just did one. We had Advocacy Week a couple weeks ago, and we took up a group, including some people who had never been before. And, we're pretty intimidated walking in. Like it's intimidating walking in the first time, the marble hallways and these names on the doors. But it's very quickly, you realize you're talking to other people. You're talking to other people who are there because they want to make a positive change. They're doing it through government. We're doing it through nonprofits. And so being able to go in and to take these volunteers in to tell the story of why these issues matter to them, to the missions they serve, ultimately to the people they serve, it's storytelling, which fundraisers do so well. And so if you're in the fundraising and nonprofit space, listening to this and want to get involved, reach out to us, because it's connecting on those Hill days, it's one-on-one meetings, it's writing a letter. And very often we are looking for passionate people in specific states because their senator or their legislator has influence there on the right committee. And so if you happen to be in one of those states and you're reaching out to us, you could have significant influence, and one person makes that difference. So
love that.
So that's the answer to how to get involved.
Yeah.
And then the risk and reward, promise and peril.
Yeah. Where do you stand? I mean, this doesn't have to be a TNPA stance, but are you at a time that you wake up and you're like, this is going to be so exciting and awesome, or wait and see, or kind of where are you in between? It probably speaks to just your own kind of views on technology in general.
Yeah. I think, I think we're walking that place where there's a fork in the road, and we as a sector, we as I have two teenagers. I have a daughter who's planning to be an English teacher, and she thinks AI is terrible because she says, now as an English teacher, I'm not going to be teaching anybody how to write. And it's like I'm going to be teaching history because we'll be looking at literature, but like nobody's going to need to learn to write anymore. And, so it's just really interesting hearing a 17-year-old with that perspective, right? Wow. When you think about young people being the early adopters. So when we think about this fork in the road, I see it with optimism, but I think it comes with a healthy dose of, we could get this really wrong if we just let it happen to us. And so some of that taking the reins of not just stepping out of the game because we're afraid of it, but also being aware of, of what the perils are, to use your word, Nathan, and then getting ahead of those and making good choices and learning from mistakes.
Love that. All right, Scott. And no surprise there, probably why I admire you so much, Shannon, because I am like exactly right there in that as well. I get really enamored with the promise of it, but I tend to stay up at night a little bit concerned at our reaction to it. So Scott, why don't you close us out, and we'll definitely put your LinkedIn in the show notes, and as well as TNPA's website. And Shannon, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us. Scott, any last words?
Yeah, thanks for spending time with us. For your daughter, they say that Gen AI is the revenge of the liberal arts majors, so hopefully it'll swing in her favor. But thanks everyone for listening. Any thoughts, feedback, questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on LinkedIn. If you listen, share, subscribe. If you don't like it, don't tell anybody, but still subscribe.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Shannon. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you for episode 26 in a week. So, Shannon, thank you again. It's so great to have this time with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Rob.